So yeah, so welcome everyone to yeah. So for those who missed it, I had Streamlabs up originally, and I was like, oh, I have Streamlabs being shared, and I was like, oh gosh, like I should move it. Instead of moving it, I quit, and then everything died. So yeah, dusting off the live streaming sort of setup and those things. And so what I was explaining a bit earlier was I kind of taken a bit of a hiatus from live streaming because for those of you who don't know, I work with some pretty awesome streamers like Jason Langsdorf, who has his Learn with Jason channel, and my coworker Cassidy with her Cassidy Twitch channel, and both are for me like they're so polished in what they basically have inside of the channels and the various things. And so yeah, I think a little bit of imposter syndrome set in with, so it was like, okay, so what I need is like I need a custom theme for my stream and all this stuff. And before I do anything, right, like I have to make sure everything is set up like the traditional, like I want everything to be perfect before I do anything. But the truth is that will come in due time. So this is me just like diving sort of right back in. And so today we're going to be here talking about some of the work I do with Obsidian, and then just like kind of I guess sort of do some, I call it like pair note taking. And so this is a little bit different than probably from like the traditional what I might do normally with like building, live streaming, those sort of things. Because one of the things I've realized over the coming months is that as developers, as we're building things, a lot of times what comes out of those like products and stuff usually originate in the different ideas. And I know that a lot of us are really avid sort of basically learners, right? Because one of the things that is important with staying in like sort of keeping up to date with tech is basically constantly learning, but then tracking knowledge management and these sort of things can be tricky, especially on a personal level. So note taking has become like a big obsession of mine, and I'm sure we'll talk more about different content and stuff I'll be creating for that going forward. But in the meantime, so today what I thought would be fun is I've been really itching on finding a better way to process basically the notes and highlights that I'm taking from books as I'm reading, and how to make it basically sustainable. Because I don't know about you, but a lot of times I've read something and it's great and I'm really excited about it, and then a month later, 2 months later, I don't want to recall what's happening. Like, yes, I could technically bring it up in Kindle, I could look at the highlights, but it would be nice if there was a more sort of tangible way to bring in all those different ideas and have them aggregate further into something. So given that, what we're going to do today is we're going to take a book that I just sort of recently wrapped up reading called How to Take Smart Notes. And we're going to figure out just sort of the workflow around that. So looking forward to doing that with y'all. What's up, Matt? Okay, so what I have up here right now is we have Readwise. And so for those who don't know, Readwise is basically like a service to help you basically like pull out data that you in services. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump over to my dashboard. And basically what it allows you to do is take out highlights. And so in Kindle, for example, Evernote, like there are ways to basically input data and output it. And so, for example, let's go ahead. So I want to download everything in Markdown because, as I'll show, for those who are new to Obsidian, I'll show you how that works. But the idea here is that you can see I have a bunch of books that I've have in my library right now within Kindle, which is set up as an integration. So let me show you where that is actually. I think, is it account settings? Not this one. Oh, I know what it is. It's over here in Connect and Sync. Import highlights. Okay, so you'll see here, for example, that basically when you're setting up Readwise, what you have the ability to do is set up different basically funnels of content on which you basically either take notes or want to bookmark things. And so a lot of times you want to then be able to sync those things to another third party or whatever you want to do. So for me, as you can see, I have a couple of integrations here, but honestly, the main one I use is the Kindle one. Because while it's nice to have Kindles to reference, what I really want is to be able to actually I don't want to have to copy and paste things out manually. I would like to automate this process. So knowing that, we're going to actually export the highlights from a book. And so you'll see here that you can basically choose what books that you want to highlight. Some people have like an automatic sync workflow. For me, I'm currently not at the point where I feel like I'm ready to do that because one of the challenges with having things constantly sync is that as I'm sort of moving things around, I think I'm probably going to end up with some merge conflicts in my note-taking database, which I'll show you all in a little bit. So let's start with the simplest. We're going to take a look at how to take smart notes today. As you can see, I have 196 highlights here. And so I got a lot to go through. And so this is definitely one of those things that I'd love to automate. So I'm going to go ahead and download all the highlights you see here to include the highlight location, custom formatting. So for example, you can see here, it gives you the opportunity to determine the template around what's like basically how things are going to be exported. Oh, I see a question from Thesis 500. I did not build Readwise. This is just one of the tools in my workflow to pull out highlights. So yeah, so I'm going to leave everything standard actually right now. I'm not sure I'm really ready to use custom formatting. And so really all I want to export is how to take smart notes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and download this. And so you see the one of one has been exported. So I'm going to go ahead and, all right, here we go. Got a lot of things in the download folder. All right, Readwise. I did it somewhere. Books? Is it in book? Okay, you know what? Too many things in here. We're going to the desktop. Okay, much better. Here we go. What did it impact? Here we go. That is interesting. Oh, by the way, yes. Okay, anyways, I'll talk about that later. Okay, so inside of books, we have our how to take smart notes markdown. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this inside of Obsidian. And so here, so Obsidian, for those who don't know, is basically a new type of sort of a free software that you can download. And what it does, it helps to manage markdown files in sort of a new way as far as relationship building. And so let me open up the sidebar here. What you'll see here is that it basically looks a lot like VS Code in the sense that you have your file explorer on the left. And then so if I were to open up something like how to take smart notes, you'll see that it has here, this looks like standard markdown, but you can switch over, for example, to like the preview mode where you can actually see what everything looks like. And so for me though, this is actually a series of notes that I had exported out a while ago, actually when I was using Roam. And so what I really want to do, I kind of want to start from scratch again because that workflow didn't really work out for me. And so we're going to go ahead and take a look at this how to take a smart notes one that we just exported and see how that goes. So let me go ahead and do that. Let's close all the things so that we can focus. All right, so let's take a look at what we got here. So nice. So you'll see that one of the things Readwise does for us is it automatically exports the photo for us, pulls out some of the metadata, and starts to pull out some of the highlights with some links. So this is fairly standard, and this is good. I can work with this. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy over this. And over here inside of my Obsidian, I'm going to go ahead and just actually, let's see, where does this file currently live right now? Let me see, how to take smart notes. So it's currently in my migration folder, meaning I'm still in the process of kind of processing this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this one, I'm just going to call this one old, because I really don't want to deal with that at the moment. Okay, here's the new one. Oop, it's pasting all like the, okay, here we go. Cool. Okay, so now I've successfully exported all of my notes from how to take smart notes. And, hi, what's up, Luke? And okay, so scrolling all the way to the top. Okay, so once again, we can see here that when we enter in preview mode, we have the picture of the book. We have some metadata in here. And so some of the things that you might be wondering is like, okay, like what's so interesting about this, right? Because if this is just a glorified markdown editor, this is not very interesting. Well, one of the things that makes Obsidian really good in my mind is the fact that it deals with the idea of atomic notes. Basically the idea that you can take individual pieces of text or basically blocks of content and recompose them. But not only that, you can create relationships between them in a way that's easy to traverse and navigate. So the way to show you this, for example, is if I open the local graph here, you'll see right now that as you would expect, here we have the how to take smart notes note that's all by its little lonesome. But what we want to do over time, as you can imagine, as you're building upon ideas, is to create a network of ideas. So earlier I tweeted about this idea of a blank page syndrome. And I think this honestly impacts a lot greatly how when we are approaching how we're writing and how we're connecting ideas, it becomes very difficult because when everything's in one gigantic page, it's really a lot to process. And not to mention, it's hard to remember what ideas connect with what, let alone break them apart, recompose them, or in the event you need to update something, basically do those things. And so here now, if I go ahead and take a look and replace this, okay. Let's see, actually it has the old one up and running. Why is that? Do I have, hold on, let me open up a new one. Pasted. Let me go ahead and update this. How to take smart notes. New, okay. Let's do that, okay. So let me go up to the top. Oh, I wish this was easier to do. Okay. So one of the things, okay, we were talking about relationships when I got distracted because apparently I was on the old note. Let's start talking about how relationships are created. And so one of the things we'll know when we read a lot of different books, especially when they have overlap with authors, for example, is that a lot of times you want to be able to see those connections. So let's take, for instance, right, if I go ahead and create a new note here, and let's say we have, in fact, I'm trying to remember, let's just say we're reading, so there's a new book that we've read, and in this book, they actually happen to mention the author, Dr. Ahrens, here, right? And so let's say we have a quote here that's like talking about, let's say they actually quote this line in this new book, right? And you also, once again, like, because you read this book 3 months later, you were like, okay, that was interesting. And so you take notes. The thing is, like, as it stands right now, when we're looking at the graph, you're gonna see that each thing stands on its own, right? As you kind of would expect. But what happens is, if we gone ahead and turn this into basically a link here with Dr. Ahrens here, you'll see that immediately Obsidian has actually identified that this relationship exists between the two things. That new book and this person, or in this case the author, Dr. Ahrens, they have a relationship. And what's really interesting about this then is that if we go ahead and then link the same thing inside of another note, what that does here is that, oh, I forgot. I need to increase the depth in terms of the relationship. You'll see now that actually Dr. Ahrens has actually been referenced in other places. And so in particularly, I had just linked it in how to take smart notes. But you notice that in my existing, like, basically note system, I've actually already mentioned him in other places. And so this is particularly interesting from idea traversal and starting to identify how things relate to one another. And so, okay, that having been said and done, let's go ahead and we're just going to pair because I want to process this note anyway. So I'm just going to delete the current file and let's just start processing some of these things. Okay, so category. Okay, so one of the things I do with my Obsidian notes is I usually have a block of front matter at the really top to define a couple of things. And so here, actually, I realize how big is this on there? It's a little small on the stream. So I'm going to go ahead and bump this over and then move this. Oh, I forgot it's doing the auto size. Let me determine the auto width toggle. Great, perfect. And that way I can let you all see that wasn't what I wanted. Okay, toggle auto width, please let me do it. Oh, that's what the auto width is. Darn it. Okay, no matter. Okay, so you'll see a couple things up here inside of the front matter. The first of which is a UUID. This is something that basically it just represents the timestamp at which it was created. The idea here being that in the event in the future there are other things that call it have the same title, you have at least some ability to differentiate them at the content level. And so a couple of other things you'll see here include like the alias, which is basically ways for you to refer to the note in other ways. So you'll see right now, if I were to link to this note directly, you'll see like how to take smart notes new, for example, is being autocomplete. But this is not always how we might want to refer to it, right? So in the event, like I refer to this book a lot, I might actually want an abbreviation for it, right? So like, for example, How I Met Your Mother is like HIMYM as far as communities go. Then this one might be, for example, How to Take Smart Notes, HTTSM, for example. And what's nice about this now is that you can basically now refer to it and it'll autocomplete that in there. So that's basically what that allows you to do, which is super nice and convenient. Couple of the other things is that inside of, I actually manually create the dates field. And so normally when it comes to file creation and modification, you kind of rely on the file itself to track that, meaning the operating system which creates it attaches the metadata directly to the file. The reason I've learned not to rely on that is because I've been burned by this in the past, where what happened was basically I had all my metadata tracked via the operating system. And then for whatever reason, when I had to restore the file or restore the database, basically the file system recreated all of the recreated everything, which means everything got reset. And so all of a sudden, all that data that I had regarding seeing how things were related over time basically disappeared. So this is my way of preserving it. So at least in the event it is lost on the file side, I still have something to refer to. Okay, that said, let's do this thing. Okay, so we can finally get, I think now I've explained some of the basics of Obsidian, we can actually start talking about what I'd like to do today, which is processing notes. Because right now we just have a pile of ideas, and I'd like to go ahead and go through that. All right, so let's start going through it. So here, okay, so one of the things I highlighted here was this idea that improving organization of writings all makes a difference. Okay, so we talked about atomic notes, and so for those who are familiar with like basically atomic principles is the idea of making things stand on their own. So right now, for example, how to take smart notes is this giant note that contains a lot of ideas. And so I want to kind of dissect this particular thread right into its own thing. So normally how you would do this is we'd go ahead and we'd open a new note, right? And we'd go ahead and move that over. So I'm going to show you the manual way of doing this. We'd say, okay, so this is interesting. The reason why I thought this was interesting at the time has to deal with the fact that writing has to deal with like developing, like sort of the organization of writing. This is what we're kind of touching on in this concept. And so once we moved it to the file, your next step is probably thinking like what it wants to be titled. And so let me go ahead and flip the rotation on this because I think that usually takes some getting used to for people. But so the file name here is currently Untitled 31, which is not very helpful, right? Because what we want to be able to do is reference notes over time as it grows. And so Andy Matuszak, who's really known for, well known for creating sort of the sliding pane example, that layout that you're seeing here, he has this theory that when it comes to naming your notes, it's actually, think of it like naming an API when that you kind of want it to be really declarative in terms of what it is you're getting at, rather than trying to like, usually we try to make note names as short as possible, but in this case, we probably would be beneficial in just being more sort of verbose, I guess, in a way with the note title. So in this case, for example, what I'm interested in here is that, let's see, so we're saying that they started with a blank sheet note paper. By doing this, they ignored the most part, mainly note taking. Yeah. So the difference here is that writing here, this is actually the key line that I actually really wanted out of this paragraph, in that writing a lot of times starts earlier than the blank screen, and that the writing of the argument, right, is the smallest part of its development. So here I think I'm trying to, so what I want to do is I want to repackage this, right? So a couple things here. One, I'll use the markdown syntax of quoting this so that I know that this is not something I wrote. This is something that I've taken out directly out of somewhere. But more importantly, as we've talked about before, we want to make sure that we relate back to the original source, because this is one of the hardest things about idea traversal. And so what I would do here normally then is I'm going to go ahead and say, why is it doing that? That's weird. Okay. I want to refer to the fact that this comes all the way back to how to take smart notes new. And the reason, like the beauty of doing it this way now is that when we're taking a look at Untitled 31, which let me open up the graph for, you'll see now that I have basically a backlink to the original source in which it came from. Now, again, we talked a little bit about notes and note names. So what I want to talk about here is the importance of, let's see, looks like they're dealing, it looks like this relates to the blank page conundrum, like the blank page syndrome that I talked about earlier. So the importance of organization prior to writing. All right. And so now that I have this here, one of the things I like to do is start to sort of accumulate the different ideas that I have inside of basically the book. So here, I'm going to go ahead. Actually, no, I'm not going to do that just yet. I want to go ahead and finish my thought here, because one of the things that's tricky about when we just simply highlight is that it's not really as sticky in terms of allowing us to sort of reuse and repurpose. And so now that I've quoted this, what I really want to do is sort of this technique of what some people call progressive summarization. But in reality, what I want to do here is really put it into my own words. Because if you think of it this way, if in the future, not even in the future, right? Because the idea here is this is related to the idea of what I see. As you can see here, I have a whole note already on blank page syndrome. This is related to this idea. So you can imagine that if in the future I wanted to write a blog post or whatever, or create a video on blank page, like the blank page syndrome, having these ideas as we take small notes, like really concrete ideas, composing them together makes it that much easier. And so I might be like, the idea behind this is that, let's see, blank page syndrome is often the result of not having concrete ideas being formulated prior to the actual act of writing. And so that's sort of my kind of interpretation of it, right? Is because, and so here now that I've written this, I'm thinking, okay, yep. So it's not even organization is not accurate, really. What I'm trying to say is of aggregation of ideas prior to writing. Okay, and so the beauty with this now is I can go ahead and close this. And so in the future, you'll see something pretty interesting. So if ever we're like, let's talk about the blank page syndrome, right? So I'm going to open my blank page syndrome note. You'll see here that I actually had taken this note quite some time ago. This was back in 2020, July. And I sort of expressed this idea that I really enjoyed the fact that calling it a syndrome, because a lot of people do find staring at a blank page to be kind of, I don't know, I find like kind of a traumatic thing. Because you're just kind of like, what do I say? Do I have anything to say? But now, on top of having this note here, you'll see that the Obsidian allows me to start seeing the relationships between other points in time in which I basically related ideas. So when you see here, the importance of aggregating ideas, important to writing. So if in the future, let's write a blog post right now, we're saying like how to, so let me create a new post, for example, that's like how to combat blank page syndrome. Well, one of the things we would do is I would probably just start by bringing in my blank page syndrome link here to say, hey, this is like the kind of the topic I want to go to. And I'd really like to see how it relates. And so I can increase the depth to see kind of where its relationship is. And so what's cool about this is I can go, oh, I remember now. I had this idea of aggregation idea prior to writing. And so what I can do is I can link directly to it, which allows me to do one thing. So you can see now that there is a relationship here. And then more importantly, what's really cool about this is that I'm going to go ahead and actually open the same tab up here and then show you the preview of it, is if I throw an exclamation point inside of it, it'll actually integrate that thing directly into it. And then so importantly, if you're like, well, what if I don't want the entire like quote? I really just want this little piece that I had. Obsidian can actually let you go down to the block level by using the caret to basically say, I want you to target a specific block. And so by targeting that, you'll see that now I brought in a past thought into what I'm basically, as I'm composing my ideas. And this is basically one of the many, many awesome things about Obsidian. And so to be honest, combating blank page syndrome is probably something I do want to talk about at some point. So honestly, I'm just going to leave it alone at this point. Like, I'm not ready to publish anything, but since we've had this conversation, I've written it down, I've created the relationships, and can always come back to this later on. So let me go back to how to take smart notes. And let's go ahead and keep talking through some other things. I'm going to skip down just a little bit because sometimes I highlight a bunch of things. So let me scroll. Okay, I like this one. Okay. Okay, so now I've showed you how to do things manually as far as allowing you to basically refactor your ideas. And that's what I find really interesting about Obsidian and why I think it actually really translates really well into the development community is because if we were to approach writing as we do code in terms of modularization, reusability, and then basically componentizing it, I think we could unlock a lot of people in becoming writers because unfortunately, I think the way we perceive writing as a whole is generally this sort of like, I don't really like doing it. But I found that talking with a lot of different people that it's not so much the act of writing that people dislike, but like a lot of the paradigms we've kind of grown up with as far as like, well, if you're going to write an essay, you're going to need to have your thesis, an introductory paragraph, 3 argument paragraphs, and a conclusion. Like we have, I think over time just kind of been a bit beaten down with that approach to writing. And the truth is that I think writing is much more free than that. And I'm hoping as more and more people learn about this type of thinking when it comes to atomic note taking, that they'll be able to sort of bring that as well. And because again, I think a lot of us have different experiences that really should be shared out. And I think the world would just overall just kind of benefit from that. So, okay. So here, right, I really like this discussion of willpower. This has actually been a theme that's been in a lot of different books that I've read over time. And so rather than having to create a new note, manually move it over and do things, I'd like to show you a little workflow that I actually use, which is called, just as I had mentioned, it's called refactoring. So there's this plugin in Obsidian called a note refactor. And so I specifically use this one called extract selection to a new note. And what that does is when I go ahead and hit it, you'll see that it automatically populates a template for me where not only has it moved everything over into basically a brand new file, but it's also created that same link in here so that the relationship exists both ways. And so you'll see now that one of the nice things about this is that, well, first of all, I refactored way too much stuff. So let me update this file name here. And so you'll see also though, when I update the file name in one place, as you would hopefully expect, it actually goes ahead and does that as well. Oh, should have done that over here as well. Whoops, did I accidentally close it? I did accidentally close it, my bad. Bum, 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 bum. Yep, here we go. Okay. That's a little weird. Why didn't it update this time? Okay, I'll deal with that in a little bit. Okay, so well-defined task and willpower. Do you share books that you read somewhere, Goodreads or something? Yeah, I do actually. Goodreads, I believe, if you just go to goodreads.com, I believe I'm under Ben Code Zen. That should be it. If it's not, let me know. Okay, so here we have our note, although it's kind of bothering me that this didn't update. I'm just gonna relink it. Oh, you know what probably broke it? Is that it was probably an illegal file name. So let me go ahead and check something real quick. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Okay, now that updated correctly. All right, good. I feel better now. So let me go ahead and remove that now. Great. Okay. So let's focus in on this idea of willpower, because I think a lot of us, especially as developers, we have a lot of things that we're often trying to do. And we have the notion of productivity, this idea that, if you have the will, you'll find the way. Except there have been a lot of studies that have been done basically that have started to, well, basically disprove this notion, because willpower is a finite thing that we have. And rather than simply trying to sort of muscle your way through everything, that actually it's a lot easier when you have a predictable, basically, set of routines or habits that you've basically trained up over time and you can basically automate. And so, yeah, if we think about it from the development perspective, like doing things with willpower is like saying, well, if I want to transcribe, like convert an Excel spreadsheet into a CSV file with certain format, grit and willpower would tell you that you should go ahead and edit every row manually and swap things. And then every time you have to do that, you just repeat. But instead, though, having well-defined, meaningful tasks, if you think of it from a productivity perspective to coding, is actually basically about automating these things. It's basically how I see it. And so with the refactor, you'll see a couple things. One is that it populated what I have for a refactor template in that it automatically inserted the metadata at the top. But more importantly, you'll see here that I actually have a footer for additional metadata regarding like tags and related links, because I like to be prompted with sort of certain properties that don't necessarily fit well in the front matter. And so for those who are more familiar with Obsidian, the problem with the front matter is that you can't actually link to anything in the top, at least not that I'm currently aware of. And so you can see down here that it'll actually tell me that when I created this note, where it actually came from. And the idea of an origin, I think, is actually important when it comes to understanding ideas and the history behind it. And more importantly, especially with things like recommended by, I don't know about y'all, but when it comes to books, games, or whatever resource it is, it's really helpful for me to actually link the individual or group that inspired those ideas, because what this allows me to do is start to see connections between different people, different groups over time. And so in this particular case, we don't have anyone who was recommended by, but that's fine. So I'm just going to kind of wipe out this property because it doesn't necessarily make sense, right? This is a note for me. And then the other thing too, as well, is that I also like to check who the creator is. So in the event that basically this would be the same thing as like the author, the producer of said content. And once again, this doesn't really make sense because this is something that I want to talk about as far as like my own ideas. But an analogy of this is that if you have different blog posts written by the same author, but then they're also on the YouTube video, like a YouTube video that you're watching, by putting them in the creator field, it's allowing me to basically see that like, hey, this one person I basically watch and respect is on these different platforms, and this is how I can relate their ideas. So this is pretty useful from my end to kind of have these sort of prompts on what I can do. Now, once again, this is a quote though, right? So I don't want it to confuse it with my own ideas. This is, I think, one of the hardest things when it comes to note-taking, is basically finding ways to control like how to scope things, basically. And a note-taking system is useful because, not because you're trying to collect information. This is probably one of the hardest, I would say, like perspective shifts that comes with idea generation and capture, is that we're so used to just saving things just in case. And so I'm sure I'm not the only one, but when it comes to like the amount of things I have bookmarked to read, things to do, or all the tabs I have in my browser window with things I'm hoping to do, you know, a lot of times the problem with this is that you're never going to get around to it. And more importantly, we over time lose context of the thing. And so, for example, here's a great example. A friend of mine recently recommended, I am in the wrong window. He recommended me this podcast from the Changelog podcast. And I'm just remembering this. Like, this is truly like, I'm showing you how I'm thinking about things. And so he said that I should definitely check it out. It's one of the best episodes he's seen. And it was actually written on about Go, I believe, recently. Was it? Let me see. Let me see if I can, is there a search within this? Golang, would that be good enough? Okay, I believe. I think it was this one. Okay, let's say it was this one for now. What I would do, okay, normally, rather than having this simply be bookmarked somewhere else that like maybe one day I'll catch up, I would instead go into my knowledge management system. I would create a brand new note. And so let me go ahead and set up the basic metadata here. And so what you're seeing here, actually, let me slow this down a little bit. I'm using a keyboard shortcut to basically insert templates. And so you can see I got a lot of different templates, and we can do a whole episode on that another time. But basically here, let me jump top here. I inserted the meta front matter block. And so when I insert that, that'll populate everything. And so to show you what that's like, the metadata front matter is right here. And so it takes basically a very simple, I call it a templating language, which is done using the Obsidian templater plugin. And you'll see that it's doing things as far as like taking in the current date with a specific format, the time, etc. And then this is sort of their shortcut for pulling in the current title of the file, and then as well as where to put your cursor. So just basically that's how this works. And so in addition to my metadata, I also need my footer. And so you'll see here, boom, I have 1 and 2. And for those wondering, yes, 100% I could put that all into one template, but I haven't quite done that yet. So one thing at a time. Okay, so a couple of things. I want to capture this podcast. So what I probably do is I just copy the title and I'd probably say something like Golang, GoFlow, podcast episode with changelog. That's all I would do for the top to make the title of the note very, very specific. In fact, I might just say changelog podcast because changelog could mean different things in different contexts. And so knowing that now, what I would do is I would say, okay, so now that I have this is a podcast. So I actually so tagging is also a thing in Obsidian as well. So I would call this a resource and this is going to be a podcast. So in case, and I always jump ahead of myself. So let me explain the tags because I realize I've set up a lot of different infrastructure. Let's start from the very bottom where we just went over it before I move back up. Still getting used to the live talking aloud my ideas. Couple of things. One, the origin of this, basically the way I like to put it is that where is the source coming from? So like I mentioned, this is the changelog podcast. So I'm just creating this. So you'll notice a couple of things here is that one, changelog podcast actually does not exist in my knowledge management system yet. But that is okay because what Obsidian does is when you create a link like this in the wiki link, you'll see that it actually in this sort of graph representative view is grayed out. Because it's saying that like, hey, look, I'm creating basically a reference of an idea that you're basically saying that you think is important for later on, but I haven't actually created the said file. And so once again, just to show you how that would, the reason that's beneficial is because even though there's no, let me go back. Even though there's no markdown file for this just yet, if I create a new page and there we go, I can still refer to the changelog podcast here. And that way, once again, let me extend the degree of depth once more. You'll see that like these two, the Untitled 33 and Golang Flow, both still relate to changelog podcast, even though I haven't actually had the time to actually give changelog podcast like a full page, which is totally fine. And sometimes you want to see relationships at that shallow level because as you can imagine, relationship between ideas there are weak relationships, there are strong relationships. And so this is an idea where it's like a weak one, where in that we want them to know they're related, but I haven't really thought through like the depth in which and strengthening those connections. So knowing that, let me make sure. Okay, let me delete this file. And so if you haven't noticed, I use the command palette a lot, which should feel very comfortable for a lot of us in development from VS Code. But okay, that said, okay, this is what I love about this, the system I created, is that, so my buddy Jack is the one who recommended it to me. And so what I can do with this is, whoa, there's a lot of stuff that came up with this. So you can see Jack and I have lots of fun conversations. And so let me go ahead and reduce the depth so that it's not so crazy. Boom. Okay. So now what's really cool about this now is I have the context of being able to know that like, okay, there's this podcast episode from changelog that's related to my friend Jack. And as far as the topics go, it's actually related to, I'm going to just say topic Golang for now. And what's nice about this is this idea that a lot of times the way we write our notes are not the way we're going to consume them later on. And so what I mean by that is let's go ahead and close all this up. And that if right now I don't have time, let's say, to listen to the podcast episode, but if in the future I suddenly have time to talk about Golang or those sort of things, I can use this sort of ideas to go, well, if I'm inspired at the moment because I'm studying about Go, I could go into my search and say, well, let's look at our topic, right? I had topics. I'm going to let me see if I have any inspiration regarding topic Golang. And as you would expect, the episode's actually popping up. But also more importantly, sometimes it's related to the thing that, to something else entirely. And so, for example, another way I might be looking for that, which is actually more common for myself personally, is the idea that like when I'm talking to someone or I relate strongly to things that people recommend. And so my first thought actually usually will be to the person recommended, because I'll be like, Jack told me about this podcast I should listen to. What was that? And so what that would allow me to do, hold on, let me make sure that Jack's file, let me cut that out real quick. Okay. So what's nice about this is that if I pull up Jack in the future, what that allows me to do is actually to see all the things that are related to him. And then what I could even do is I could filter it down by like, there was something about a podcast. So I think type podcast. Oh, was it not podcast? Okay, here we go. Interesting. So you can see here that like now with the traversal, I have a different origin point, but I can still get to the same place as far as what it is I'm actually looking for. And I think that is very, very useful over time. Because again, at a simple level, you might be like, well, a lot of note-taking systems do this. But again, to give you a glimpse as far as how complex this can get, this is my global graph. So let me go ahead and remove that out. And please don't crash the computer. Here is, wow. Yeah. Okay. Here is a data visualization of basically the current notes system that I have, along with the various relationships inside of it and basically how they're talking to each other. And so, again, with the amount of, in the age of information we live in, where we're constantly intaking new things, I think it's actually really important for us to be able to see how those things relate over time and across different disciplines. And that's very difficult to do with traditional note-taking skills, as well as traditional note-taking sort of ideas. And yeah, so with that, we still have, looks like I am still doing pretty well on time, which is awesome. So I am going to go ahead and make sure there are no questions. Cool. Let's go ahead and go back to that exercise and just do some more. Actually, you know what? We did some note taking together. I actually need to do some template cleanup is what I want to do. Unless people, so Thesis 500. Yeah, so I am not building a neural network, but what I am, so if you're new to this space, another term that this is called second brain. And as we can see here, a lot of times our ideas and our interests do, basically it does look like this. But a lot of times the relationships aren't the most obvious to us when it comes to how those things relate. And over time, like okay, let me explain a little bit about how the graph works. Is that every single circle, every single dot you see on here basically represents a markdown file to some extent. In addition, the size of, for example, this is a note. This is the note I have for like my dad, for example, and the size of the node shows you how often it's basically being used, and it's basically the strength of it. And this is really fascinating because what you can do is over time start to really get a sense of what's important to you, because while we're taking in a lot of information on a day-to-day, a lot of times with most capture systems, you're not doing usually a really good job processing it. Meaning, because we have this idea of like, just in case I need it, we keep hoarding everything. But then we never really, what we forget is that most of the time what we need is what a friend of mine told me is called just-in-time information, which is like, when you need it, you'll get it and you'll make it useful. And so what's nice about this sort of modular way of taking notes is that over time, just like earlier when we were talking about the blank page syndrome, this is something that doesn't have to be complicated to start. It can just be a couple sentences on this idea that really struck you, and something that like is basically like you felt was important to you in the moment, because that's really the value behind the second brain and the value behind note taking, is because really what you want is an aggregate of things that have you felt were important to you over time. Now those connections can change and weaken over time, right? Like maybe eventually I'll not care as much about blank page syndrome. But what this does allow me to do is that if I have an interest in blank page syndrome now, I can easily pick up where I left off 2 years later. And that's what I think a lot of systems fail to do well, is that especially with most note-taking software, you end up dealing with some sort of legacy like tech debt, basically with your notes, that make it almost impossible to figure out where you started, and you basically have to start from scratch all over again. Because as you notice, right, for example, I think some of you, when I open up the blank page syndrome, you'll notice that it's sitting in a migration folder, because basically what I've done is I've moved all my like Evernote, Roam. I've tried like I think I had like OneNote. I moved everything I had into Markdown files, and because of the way things are connected now, I don't have to worry about the fact that it's not perfectly ready. Like it's not everything isn't perfect in its place. Because Obsidian makes it really easy to surface those information. And as they're more important, like so right now, we talked about migration today. You'll notice that one, it doesn't look at all like the format that I have. But what I can do is I'm just gonna move this into like my official Zettelkasten folder, which for those who are new to the term just basically means notebox. I believe it's German. But this is like the term that's pretty prolific in the note-taking community. So I moved it into the Zettelkasten folder, and it's now no longer in migration. So you'll see that blank page syndrome is now inside my Zettelkasten folder. And more importantly, this is where I'm like, okay, this is something that's starting to be interesting to me again. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure I insert my metadata, and let's start updating some of this. So it was updated today. Great. I don't even think content creation. Well, maybe that's just it. I thought it was related to content creation at one point, which actually is true. So I'm going to go ahead and wipe this out. I'm going to take this, and instead of using content creation, I will call it topic content creation. And then let's see, that's it, I think. What else can I do? Oh, modes. I told you all I would explain to you about my tagging system. So I have, again, basically, I'll try to create like full-blown content regarding these ideas. But mode here, I basically have this idea, and again, I'll explain it to here. I'll call it spear modes. And so I'll at least type it out so you all have something to refer to. I believe there are different modes in terms of doing work. And so it's broken down. I've broken it down into the acronym SPEAR. And so I'll explain how that works. So the first one that most of us are familiar with, so I'm sort of using like sort of a taking a flight model, in that the P stands for pilot, which is basically our planning phase. A lot of times when we sit down to do work, we need to sort of forecast what we think will basically take to get there. So if you imagine a pilot planning how to get from point A to point B, this is a mode of work that we're basically trying to get, like, we need to get into in order to better see what's going to happen and plan for obstacles. So P for pilot, basically we're in planning phase. E here, actually I'm going to skip this one actually, because this way it'll build a little bit better. The other one is airplane mode, right? So you have pilot mode, you have airplane mode. If you think about airplane mode, airplane is where you're just following the itinerary that was planned out by the pilot. And so you're basically along for the ride, everything's planned out, nothing's gonna really change. And so airplane mode is just like, another way of thinking of this is like, if you come into a meeting, once you're in the meeting, you're basically along for the ride. Certainly things can change along the way, but there's nothing, like, it's not gonna be anything drastic. Like, you're in the meeting, we're gonna do all the meeting things until the agenda's filled up, then the trip's over, next task. So again, airplane mode. The other one, the E, for me, it stands for the engineer, because once you're done doing work, or you're done the airplane, you've done planning, there are times where what we actually need to do is work on the infrastructure that supports our work, right? And so if you think about it from like a coding perspective, this is like when we spend time trying to optimize build pipelines, and we try to figure out how to make things faster, because those impact the bottom line, right, at the end of the day. Because the pilot can do all the planning they want, and as a passenger, you can enjoy the airplane ride all you want, but like it's the engineer who makes sure that things are taken care of so that you can actually keep up. So they also do things like maintenance, right, making sure the plane is up to date. Those are some of the ideas around the engineer. On the other hand, the researcher is the person who's responsible for gathering new information and bringing basically back new things, which is honestly usually connected to the engineer, because that is usually where you're like, hey, I just discovered this new workflow automation tool that will change how I do things, right? And then the engineer's job is the one to like implement those things to make the plane run better. But researcher is a different mode, because in that mode, you're really focused on being curious and taking in new information. You're not as worried about the other logistics. And finally, the other piece of this, which I added for the S, I'm considering the SEER. So forgive me, I did push this one a little bit just for the sake of the acronym putting it together. In that a seer, for those who don't have a little bit of context, is like the prophet. Like there's the oracle, like they see everything. And a reason I'm bringing the seer into this idea is because a lot of times when we're planning trips and we're doing the pair methodology of like pilot, engineer, airplane, researcher, the seer, on the other hand, is responsible for figuring out why are we doing all of this. So that's why I use the concept of a seer, because it's about more of a global oversight. And this is where we're really starting to, this is those important questions we ask ourselves of why are we doing this? How does this relate to our values and principles at the end of each day? Because it's great if we learn ABC skill. It's great if we accomplish XYZ goal. But a lot of times, the reason why we hear people talk about things like midlife crises and like having these sort of existential like moments where we're just questioning why we're doing everything in my mind, is partially because we don't spend enough time in what I'm currently dubbing as seer mode, which is really that sort of more introspective level work and seeing like how it all relates together. I have a lot of different ideas regarding why current tooling and paradigms don't do a good job facilitating the transition between these. And I think this is one of the hardest things we have to deal with as individuals when we're often trying to be productive in our own right. Because it's like, this is managing the different pieces to allow you to switch between the contexts can be very expensive. And it's why a lot of times we find ourselves shortchanged on different pieces and we just simply try to jump from thing to thing. And so this was my long-winded way of saying that inside of my notes, certain notes, especially because I'm actually trying to use Obsidian, I'm testing the boundaries for it, using it for everything. So I mean, task management, project management, and to be very clear, I don't necessarily recommend that for everyone yet, but part of it is that I want to test the boundaries of what happens if you had full freedom and not constrained by like someone else's opinionated system, what that would look like in terms of like how to context switch and how to really relate things upon different axes of perspectives. And so in this particular case, for example, if I'm in the mood for the reason this is useful is because you can basically be like, at this point, I'm in the mood of looking for something new to learn. The modes basically, I think, are my way of trying to classify how we feel in certain moments and then therefore surface the right things. And so in this particular case, this podcast is basically what I can dub research mode. And so normally at one point, I will say it was just mode researcher. It was actually written out explicitly. But just for a little bit of fun and also just a little bit of conciseness, I just call it M for mode, capital M. And again, just for like a little bit of visual artistic differences, I use the emoji of the beaker with the chemical in order to sort of represent that. And so this way, if in the future I'm in research mode, I'm going to go ahead and queue up, like, so basically how that would, actually, you know what? No, I can show you something even cooler. So it's one thing I still haven't done really well here. So let me show you something pretty interesting. Okay. So one of the things I'm trying to figure out is a better way of aggregating notes together. And so what you can do is, so I'm going to call this like my researcher dashboard. Again, remember, this is all marked down here. But one of the syntaxes that Obsidian allows you to do is the idea of queries, a query block. And so if I use the triple backtick syntax here, what I can do is I can basically run a search query on different things. And when I open this up in preview mode, it's going to show you all the different things that have been marked with the researcher mode. And so you can see now that if I were to then say, like, I'm going to be, I want to actually look at the things that are coming up or like things that are currently active. It would be as simple as making sure that I attach status active. Again, this is a whole paradigm with tagging systems. But now you can see once that's been paired, all of the markdown files that actually that include the status active as well as the mode both appear together. And now this gives me a much more insightful look at basically all the different things I'm trying to do right now and all the things I'm trying to learn or read or whatnot. And so the reason this is cool now is that you can see now that the Golang podcast is not something I'm actively doing, right? I'm not listening to it, but it is something that I do want to keep track of and something that is important to me. So I'm going to actually add it to the queue. And so this way, right? So in the future, what I could do is I'm just going to call this like items in queue. And rather than status active, I'm going to call it status queue. And then you'll see here now that it's currently doing an alphabetical order, but at the bare minimum, the Golang podcast is here. And so this is, I think the fact that we can do this kind of thing is actually really, really powerful, because what we can do is start to organize things according to the way that makes the most sense for our own brain. And so I've explained to you now what mode is. It's like a high level overview. Like, again, I think I'll need to do a lot more deep dive into the different personas and how to best utilize them to accomplish the goals that are important to us. We talked about type. Okay, areas. So this is something that I've been experimenting with, because one of the things I found challenging is that in the pursuit of being more productive as an individual, or to be honest, I mean, productive, that word can actually have a negative connotation because there's almost this obsession with output. And I want to help. I want to sort of open up the dialogue that it really doesn't, it doesn't matter at the end of the day, right? What really matters is like the question of like, did you live according to your values and principles, right? And so there's a great YouTube video that I'm actually just going to go ahead and drop in the chat. Actually, why is it on this? I'm just going to do it. Let me see. Good, tired, Harry Chapin. Okay, let me bring that over here. All right, here. Okay. So let me bring up this while I'm talking to y'all. Pause. Okay, and then my Twitch is over here. Boom. Okay. So Harry Chapin had this idea from his grandfather that he learned. This idea of good tired versus bad tired. And the summary of it is that, you know, on a day that you are, on a day that sometimes you've won, right? You've accomplished something, but you accomplished doing something for someone else, for someone else's dreams, someone else's ideas. Those are days that you can actually be bad tired, right? Versus good tired can be a day that you lost. But you lost battles that were battles that you chose to fight, and battles that were according to your like values and principles. And I think this is part of the reason my experimentation with things is because I feel like it's really hard to figure out how to make sure that things do align accordingly to a life that you would be proud to call your own and one that you've lived. Like, once again, I say this a lot. It's really around values and principles, because it doesn't matter if you work for the most innovative startup idea, if it doesn't align with what's important to you, I think that's where the burnout happens. And that's where a lot of times we find that emotional frustration and depth. And so thesis, your question, basically super contextualizer of separate pieces of information. In some ways, yeah. This is what Obsidian is really good at, is that, don't get me wrong, it has, as you can see, a lot of this is an opinionated like experiment on how information could be organized in different frameworks. I'm hopefully to eventually build something that's a little bit like makes this process a lot easier for people, because again, there's in some ways like a lot of manual entry to this, and that's what I'd like to reduce in the future. So whether it's an Obsidian plugin or something, know that is something I am actively thinking about. But this is what I really like about Obsidian, because even actually the Harry Chapin good, tired, bad, tired, I've realized I actually have a note on it over here. And so once again, like, it's kind of neat to say that like, hey, like, these are the things that were important to me. And then like, for example, I had actually mentioned it in here. So probably, to be honest, I probably want to, for me, I kind of like like knowing when I talked about certain things, because it helps to contextualize things for me. So I could say that basically it was done on the Twitch stream on this day. And that's just something I'll just make a note of, basically, that I had talked about this. And so, yeah, so sorry. So regarding this, areas of concern, in that what this tag stands for is basically, you have oftentimes like your personal life, you have your work life, and then, for example, for those, and some of us have like side hustles. And those are different areas that have a specific concern, like when you're looking at it through that specific lens. And so the reason why I'm making it about areas is because eventually, if we're looking at things, so for example, in this case, this relates to like my own, call it like personal branding, like my tech career. So it's related to the Ben Code Zen area. But another way of thinking of things, right, which is the problem, is that a lot of times things touch multiple areas. So learning Golang, for example, actually not only impacts Benko Zen, I realized it also impacts my work at Netlify. And so what's nice about this is that as you start to, hopefully over time, honestly, I would like to release some sort of guide framework for people to work from this, because I've clearly spent way too much time thinking about this kind of thing. But I do think that a lot of times when we're looking to evaluate how we use our time, I think we're not often equipped with the right data to make sort of informed decisions. So if we take the notion of financial budgeting, right, knowing where our money's going and how to use it effectively, it's a lot easier to see, like when you have the data in front of you, you can see how much is in your accounts, you can see how much you're going to spend. It's very easy to say, I can take this amount and move it to this pocket. But I think a lot of times when it comes to our time and our energy, I'm currently calling, like, we all go time broke. And if we think about it from a resources perspective, this is what's challenging, is that money, while tangible, I think a lot of us can focus on, because it's this number we see, and we can see that our balance goes negative, it goes positive. Like, there's a relationship there we can kind of attach to. But if we think about it, our time zeroes out at the end of every day. Yet, when we look at how we're actually accommodating our time, I don't think the tools out there are adequate. And so some of you may already be like, well, we have calendars and stuff for that. But I would argue that, like, calendars are good. Like, there's a difference between budgeting and forecasting, right? And I think this is something that I picked up from the YNAB, where you need a budget software. And that a lot of times when people think about planning for the day, what they're doing is they're forecasting. Just like when you're planning your so-called financial budget, you're trying to predict the future and how you think the day will go. And so the challenge with that, though, is that, let's be honest, we don't know how things will go. We have an idea. We can say that our calendar contains X, Y, Z events. And just like budgeting, we can claim that we know how much things will cost over, like, the 5th, the 1st, like whatever the days is. But the reality is, when life comes down to it, what happens? Real life happens. Your tires, you have a flat tire, you need to replace it. Well, guess what? In your time during your day, it's the same problem, where a meeting that you originally had booked out for an hour really only took 10 minutes. And that's significant, because what that means is you've now opened yourself 50 minutes of free time, but how do you intelligently make the decision of how to invest that time accordingly? Because sometimes, like, especially given the modes that I talked about earlier, if we I'm going to jump to another principle regarding the importance of investing in yourself, then this is a very delicate thing, because there's always things to do, right? Because you can always say, oh, well, there's a to-do list. I can just take the top thing from the to-do list. But again, that assumes that you're only doing things for one particular purpose, when we know that things are often complex and impact multiple things. And so, for example, let's say you go, I'm going to take my extra 50 minutes and I'm going to study something. That's great. You've made a decision that you're going to go into, like, research and development mode. But then a question might be, for example, like you saw in my own research, like, list earlier, I have a lot of different things that I'm trying to learn, right? Like, I have a ukulele over here. I have Golang, and let's face it, like, when it comes to front end, like JavaScript, like, there's endless things to learn. But we lack the ability to make an intelligent choice, like, easily. The key word here is easily. Which one will have the most impact to our basically, like, the kind of life we're trying to build? And so in this case, for example, Golang, for example, impacts me on a couple, like, it does impact me on, like, the Benko Zen front, and it actually does help my work at Netlify. So between, for example, me going and learning, I don't know, let's say, like, an obscure programming language, that would be a lot of fun. In the event that I'm in a productive mode, it would be nice to be able to actually rank those things easily and go, well, you know what, like, actually my time spent in Golang would have a bigger outcome on my goals and, like, my sort of, like, my dreams, right? My vision for, like, the person I want to be in 2 years. But just like when it comes to money, like dieting and these sort of things, what we often, like, sort of forecast in terms of the ideal person we want to be in 30, 60, 90 days, it's often very different from the actions we take in the moment, right? It's a lot easier to go, yeah, you know what? I'm gonna turn on, like, Netflix for a bit, and then next thing you know, like, 3 hours gone, or for those who have TikTok, like before you know it, like you've lost 3 hours. Um, and I and so part of my obsession with all this is that I want to empower people with the ability to be more intentional with their time in a way that, like, again, as you also, another problem, I'm definitely going on a rant here, but hopefully you're following me here. One of the, I think the most painful things as professionals and as we go about our lives is understanding what exactly it is we've done and what that means in the bigger picture. So if I jump back into like the finance mode, when you can actually chart your spending over time, if you're trying to be like, my goal is to spend less on going out to restaurants, like something I probably have to do, right? I spend a lot of money like carrying out food. The problem with this is that, like, or not problem, when you actually can actually see whether or not that's happening, like you have measurable data to say that, like, actually not only have you not been decreasing, you've been increasing, you can make informed decisions on how you might want to change that over time. But I think a lot of times when it comes to looking at our past, call it productivity and past, like, or just, I'll just say activities again. When it comes to the things that we're doing, we actually lack the data to have the insight to decide that, like, for example, I have started picking up the ukulele over the quarantine, and this doesn't link directly to anything, but it is important to me to sort of like, sort of do something that's sort of not in front of the screen, and honestly to pick back up music a bit, just to like access a different part of my brain. And so if one of my goals is to get better at the ukulele, and if I could easily analyze this idea that, like, by the way, if I'm looking at how long I've been practicing, I haven't been practicing very much at all. It, one, allows me to very quickly make an informed, like, to make the decision to go, is the ukulele important to me? And two, if it is, then what can I do differently? Or vice versa. If it's not important, then I should shelve it for something future. And so the reason I'm saying this basically is that time, areas, goals, right. What I'm trying to do here with the Obsidian here is that I'm trying to get better at surfacing the right pieces of information, so that when you have to do things like your 360 review, so like you have to like look back at what you've done over the past year. I don't know about you all, but it's a very painful thing to do for me right now. It's hard to remember not only the things that I've done, but then it's like to like, it just makes the review process very stressful. And I think there's a lot connected here regarding personal development and the ability to get insight into that. And so Obsidian is one of the tools I think that over time, if extended upon properly, can really help to provide those levels of insight. But again, I've gotten super like philosophical with this. So I appreciate for those of you who have followed so far. But this is something that is, I think, a problem that needs to be solved. And again, there are different tools that do this to some extent. There are, like, you can time track, you can, you have to-do lists and stuff. But again, I think part of the problem is that just like with note taking, the difficult part is not measuring the individual thing. Just like it's not hard to write an individual document. But the challenging part is changing our behavior and mindset so that we can actually start to see how things relate over time and with one another in ways that might not be expected. And that's what's, I think, ultimately interesting about like my research into Obsidian and all of this, is that I'm starting to see some, like, it's really nice to see certain parts of my life start to synergize a lot better and to make explicit decisions about things that maybe aren't as important. Yeah, thanks for listening, Thesis 500. I mean, this is something that one of those things I really can't turn off. So I'm sure as time goes on and as I get in a better flow with streaming. So, you know, for those so basically my plan is to stream every other Wednesday for the most part on specifically like writing, workflow, productivity things. And then I'll be basically setting up a Thursday stream schedule probably where we'll have like the coding things. But when it comes to knowledge, like sort of personal development, this is a really, thanks Kilgore. Yeah, the idea of personal development and unlocking people at the individual level is something I'm incredibly passionate about, since I think, especially with the amount of access we have to technology these days, it shouldn't be this difficult to look back and make informed decisions about how we're spending our time and what that's actually resulting in. But right now, again, people will argue upwards and downwards. There are ways to do it, but I would argue it's too expensive. Most people aren't going to spend the time. For example, even this level of detail of tagging, I realize to some extent is a little bit absurd, because I'm like, for example, I'm applying here things that I've learned from coding as far as like composability and modularization. Because, for example, some people like early on when they're doing statuses would have actually attached it directly to the mode, for example. So, or actually area, right? If it's area bend code Zen, I might be like, I want to look specifically at when I'm in bend code Zen mode and I'm looking to research something. But the problem with this, as we just talked about, is that a lot of times things are not like, they're not single dimension. They're not binary. They're not like either they're bend code Zen or they're not. Like just in the event of this podcast impacts two different areas. And so again, having the ability to split those things up, and again, I credit coding with sort of these ideas. Like if we want to innovate in the field of technology, like innovation by definition really is just something like basically a different idea inside an existing field. And oftentimes innovation comes from different fields, right? Like right now, or not even right now, there's been a long time discussion regarding how a lot of what we so-called think of as cutting edge front end architecture principles have long been discussed in back end technologies. But at the time, because of whether it's technological limitations or whatnot, basically that wasn't available to us, right? We couldn't really think at that level. But now that front-end technologies has grown a ton, we find ourselves borrowing a lot of what we've learned from other places to make our own processes a lot more robust. And so in my mind, if we can apply that principle to everything else, in that, like, for example, like the things I'm learning in psychology can be brought into how we manage things with clients or how we improve things as a team, right? Because open source, for example, is incredibly challenging to manage at scale. And a lot of the data we have and advice we're given for dealing with it aren't designed to handle that level of workload, especially at that scale. So anyhow, that was an incredibly long-winded discussion around some of the things that have been really top of mind for me. But I do want to at least finish the different tags that I currently have. So while you also have areas, I've also found that when I'm doing sort of association of ideas with people, there are also groups of people that they tend to be associated with. So I have different teams the things are related to. And so this is super helpful for me because over time, as sometimes I'm sort of relating like groups of individuals. So for example, within Netlify, there are different teams, right? There's like the support team, there's a developer experience team, and those sort of things. And so by tagging those things, I can easily sort through notes that are just related to the team DX. I can sort it to the team support. And then also whenever we have meetings together, I just tag both teams together. That's been helpful for me to have that ability to filter at that level. We talked a little bit about status. Platform, this is something I'm playing around a little bit with, but it's particularly inspired from the fact that sometimes, especially with things like books and stuff, I want to know where I read it or what the origin is. Because like if I have a paperback version, which there are no paperback books over here, paperback book there, then it would be nice to know that I actually had a physical form of the book. But more often than not, especially with digital things, there are so many different platforms, right? Did I watch it on YouTube? Did I watch it on Netflix? Did I watch it on Hulu? And so this also, again, gives me a little bit more metadata for me to understand what sort of how these things are connected and how they relate. And more importantly, if I'm recommending it to someone else, that I can be like, so in this particular case, I will probably be listening to it on the web and not on like the podcast app. But again, I haven't actually listened to it yet, so I'm actually not even going to define that attribute. And then topic here, this is a relatively new addition, believe it or not, even though it seems like the most obvious one to use with topics, with tagging, which is the topic itself. So now I have a topic tag that specifically breaks it up. And you'll notice that I'm heavily using this idea of a parent-child relationship with this / because I certainly could do #Golang, right? This is probably what most of us would think instinctively with composing tags. But one of the things I noticed as it scaled is that you have more of a likelihood of queuing up. Sometimes you might have overlap. For example, like for those who don't know, Go also, while being a verb and also representing the programming language, is also a popular, well, I say popular primarily in Asia, a popular like board game, which is similar. I'll say chess, but Go fans will probably disagree with me. But it's like chess. Most people confuse it with Othello. And so for that reason, if I just put Go, we'll have different context associated with it. That's why, to be honest, even if I wanted to call it, like, if I didn't even want to say Golang, I could say topic programming Go. And this might be good enough. And that way in the future, if I want to refer to Go, you'll see that Go is still actually being brought up in my autocomplete. But more importantly, it's actually tagged with the correct context. So that's been super useful for me to be able to differentiate at that level. But yeah, so this is currently like the iteration I have with footers. And again, the reason why I do these sort of like little like platform topping and things is because I want to remind myself that like over time, through my own lessons learned, that like it was useful to be able to filter by this level of detail. And so it's a reminder to do those things, because otherwise, if I'm just in the process of writing things, I'll often forget to tag and categorize things accordingly. And so let's see. So Thesis 500 says, it looks like it would help to recreate not only context, but also the mood and state of mind when you go back to mine like this. Absolutely. One of the things that I've seen some people do, that, to your point, they actually talk about their emotion at a given state. So let's see, what's a good emotion for mood? I'm just gonna put, let's do a green heart. So we could say like, I could say mood, but I'm a sucker for trying to keep things unique. So I'm gonna say emotional state. This is a little long though. I'm gonna say emotion for now. Because like so part of the reason I use the emojis is for visual distinction, because over time it just like looks like just a blob of text. And so this is my way of adding a little bit of visual delight and differentiation. And so yeah, emotion can be, again, this is what I think it will be important to whatever I design, build in the future, is I think different people are going to have different triggering points, or I won't use the word triggering. They have different hooks into what will inspire them towards a certain idea. And so I think you're right in that being able to say that if I had an emotion tag and like right now I'm in like an excited mood, it's possible that we would never actually, for example, be like, give me all the ideas I've had when I was excited. I guess that's one way to do it. Yeah, Thesis is already getting ahead of me. I think there is something to be said about figuring out like the more data we can have, the more we can actually make informed decisions about, like, for example, like we talk a lot about workflow productivity hours and how some people are better in the morning, some people are better in the evening, etc. Then wouldn't it be really interesting if over time you could start to notice that clusters of notes and ideas happen not only in certain emotional states, but Thesis was saying about music. Maybe certain types of music make you a more productive writer as far as producing ideas around, and maybe even around certain contexts. You're talking about weather, but like someone that I had talked to about this very idea is a location as well. Because you might find that like a certain coffee shop with a certain ambiance might be your optimum place for basically generating those ideas. And so don't get me wrong, what I'm trying to say with that is I think that the software should help us like bring that data to surface. And so that if you were to look at like okay, Iram, I'm gonna get to your or Iram, I'm gonna get to your comment in a second. So what I did want to say regarding this is that like if we think about the purpose of software is to abstract away, in my opinion, like to automate the things that otherwise, like to save us time, to get us to help us answer important questions. And so what I would love at basically as I'm working on this concept is if you could let's call it an Obsidian plugin. You have a plugin where you tell it the different aspects and aspects of data you want to analyze along, which would allow you to then go, for example, like, okay, where do I write the most notes in what context? And then it would automatically basically have a data visualization for you. And then you can say, all right, I want you to break that down by time, right? And then it'll break it down like over the course of, let's say, a month. over the week, it'll show you that like maybe Wednesdays are the day you're most productive, and like and in the afternoon, for example. And for example, for me, that might partially be because I'm live streaming and doing this stuff, but maybe it's for another reason. But what it does allow you to do is start to drill down at questions and then actually formulate hypotheses, disprove them or prove them, or then go, you know what, I need additional data to make better decisions to make myself, like to fine tune things, right? And so I think that's what's exciting about, at least for me, I find exciting about pursuing this, is because if we can give people these answers in an easier way, I think we'll find, I would like to believe that this will actually unlock people to live more happy and fulfilling lives. And that's something, absolutely something that is important to me. Yeah, thesis sums it up right there. All of this contextual meta should give us an idea why I wrote this note in the first place. Absolutely. And so one fantastic thought there. IREM has an idea here. So been using Obsidian for a couple months, but it's still a manual process. Templates for metadata and tagging. Absolutely. So let me go ahead. I think I already have, it is a little bit out. It might be, that is someone else. Ha! Nice avatar Ben codes. So I think this is not updated, but this is at least a starting point. Sections, metadata. Okay, it didn't replace itself. Great. Okay, so let me drop this repo in the chat. Okay, so this is a resource I created some time ago. And so it's a little bit out of date. Wait, I'm not in my Twitch. Where's my Twitch? Here we go. Okay. It's a little bit out of date in terms of like I've evolved some of my ideas, but we have a couple minutes left, so I'm just going to quickly explain. So I've come to the discovery that when it comes to inserting templates, there are three main levels of templates if we think of them as tags. There are templates that you want to insert on the line level, so basically like blocks. So for example, like whenever I drink water, I have a I drank water block, which will automatically insert the emoji, the tag, and the amount that was. And so typically I try to be consistent with 8 ounces of water. I am not so detail oriented. I literally measure it roughly. So these are block level templates. And then I have what I call section level templates, in that like they're composed of multiple blocks. So in the instances of like a meeting agenda or what do I do? Meeting, I think, section, right? That's what I call them. You'll see that for my section templates, I've included like, I ought to always have like an agenda, I have the notes, and I have who participated in it, as well as some metadata I want to track. Again, this is a little bit out of date and I need to spend some time updating this. And so these are because again, these are individual blocks on their own. So for example, like sometimes I'll find myself in a call and I can automatically compose them directly. So if I want to do an agenda, you'll see that I can automatically just piece, again, because I really do think of this like coding. So again, we have our inline, basically your inline blocks. You have your sections, which are typically accounting multiple basically blocks. So in this case, it's an H2 with a clipboard with agenda. And then finally, you have your page level, which is here. So for example, I'm just gonna do a standard, oh, it looks like I have, let's try the restaurant one. What did I put in here? Oh yeah, that's right. So here's one I have for restaurants, where this time you see this is a little bit more up to date in terms of it has my front matter. When I created it, it tells me it would have renamed it based on the restaurant title. But for now, a lot of this is still experimentation, so by no means am I saying this is fixed. I was like, it might be nice to track like the address, the phone, the website, so it's easy to refer to. But the reason why I think the restaurant one is interesting is because I'm actually trying to figure out if I can, over time, actually remember what I ordered. Because more importantly, I don't know about you, but a lot of times you'll go like, I went to that restaurant 4 months ago and I remember I didn't like something, but I can't remember what. And so you order the same thing again because you're like, I can't remember. I want to solve that problem with this. So that's why I have a restaurant template, is because, again, I'm determining what level of detail I'm trying to go to, but that is the problem I'm trying to solve. Or more importantly, there's something I really liked. Then I want to be able to very quickly, like if someone's like, hey, I'm going to X restaurant, I can be like, oh, and I can queue up the note and go like, this is the thing that I love, and share it with them. And I think this is just something super useful to have. Anyways, thanks everyone. We're at time. But yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in today. Like I said, we'll be doing this every other week, and keep an eye out on the Twitch channel. It's definitely going to be a lot more active going forward. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and guess I will talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.